Big news in the Big Ten. The schedules are here. Changes coming to Big Ten football. What will happen with divisions? How does the Big Ten title game differ? Which rivalries will be played every year? And who will be heading out west to face the new LA schools that very first year? All the information you want, plus interviews with the commissioner and other decision makers now. Hi there from Chicago, Mike Hall here alongside Howard Griffith. For the next hour, we've got plenty of information for you about the future of Big Ten football schedules. This is a special show all about the upcoming 2024 and 2025 seasons. Let me just give the basic headlines. We're going to talk about every school. We're going to talk to the commissioner as well as some other key decision makers in a bit. The big headlines today is the Big Ten is going to stay at 9 conference games going forward. There will no longer be divisions. East and West will only exist this coming fall, then they will be gone. That means the top 2 teams will be meeting up in the Big Ten championship game, and these will be on a 2-year rotation. What it means is every team in the Big Ten will play every other team in the Big Ten at least once every 2 years, which includes 11 protected rivalries, which we'll get into, that will be playing every single year. What are your biggest takeaways from all this info?
Well, I think, first of all, that's exciting for the student athletes that are having opportunity to play in each one of these venues, because that's important, because these are some really nice venues to play in, particularly when you talk about being an away team, going into some hostile environments. There's some great places to play. That's going to be important. I think you look at the fact that we've gone away from the divisions, and you're going to play the top 2 teams will be in the Big Ten championship game. I think that's significant as well, because that gives you more of an opportunity when you start talking about who are the best teams in the Big Ten.
Years ago, Jim Delaney said, you join a conference to play each other.
Yes.
Not to not play each other. And the Big Ten is standing by that. Again, every other year, at least, you will play every single team. But there are some rivalries that will be protected and will be played every single year, continuing on in 2024, including some rivalries like Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, Illinois, going on and on, more than 100 years. Iowa, you notice, has 3 rivalries that they will be continuing on. Michigan has 2, their in-state rivalry with the Spartans and the game against Ohio State. And of course, you notice the longest running rivalry around in major college football, Minnesota, Wisconsin. The LA schools will be meeting up against one another. These are what make college football special. These rivalries that go back 130 plus years sometimes.
And none of them are forced. I think that's the best part of it. When you look at Penn State not having that natural rivalry, I think that's important. You look at Iowa, you mentioned them. They have some significant ones there, trophy games that are important. Those get the chance to stay in place, and that's going to be great for the fans.
I agree. These are rivalries that you wanted to maintain. Listen, the SEC's caught a lot of flack because they're only playing 8 games, and that means rivalries like this are drifting away. Yes. That's not happening in the Big Ten. You will be getting a chance to play each other. Again, those 11 teams, we'll show that throughout the show again to give you an idea of who will be playing every single year going forward. But the reason there's all this change happening is because the Los Angeles schools are joining the Big Ten, USC and UCLA. Let's show you their schedules now. We start off with USC in 2024. These are the teams that they will be playing, and the home games on the left mean Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin will be heading to LA for those matchups. Now, the following year, it will look like this. And again, if you've noticed, this means every single team in the Big Ten will be playing against USC either in 2024 or in 2025. Same thing goes for the Bruins of UCLA. They are starting off, and they will have 5 conference home games their first year. Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, Ohio State, and USC, with 4 games there on the road. The following year for them, they will play everybody else that they didn't have a chance to play with. And also, you have noticed, by the way, some, on the bottom line, some games there in non-conference. UCLA will have Georgia in 2025 on their schedule as well. That will be daunting for sure. In general, this is going to be a whole new world for everyone in the Big Ten playing these schools in LA. But it's an even bigger change for those two LA schools. What's your first thought when you see who they'll be playing their first couple
I think
seasons?
one of the things you start thinking about venues, right? And you start to think about some of the teams. You look at UCLA, Michigan, that's going to be an exciting matchup. When you talk about UCLA, their opportunities to go on the road, to come to the Midwest. They normally come every other year and play Notre Dame, but now they're going to be playing Big Ten teams in a Big Ten arena, and that's going to be exciting.
And the great thing, too, if you haven't been paying much attention to those LA schools recently, I mean, both programs
are going, well, one program's here.
One
Let's be real clear about that.
Right. USC already winning 11 games last year with Lincoln Riley as the head coach, but Chip Kelly has won 8 games and 9 games in back-to-back years for UCLA. So these are going to be nationally relevant games, especially, as you said, when they play teams in the Big Ten that have national fan bases, like the reigning Big Ten champions, the Michigan Wolverines. In 2024, here's what they have. At home, they will have Maryland, MSU, Minnesota, UCLA, and Wisconsin. On the road, they will have these 4 teams. You notice the non-conference. They also have Texas in the non-conference slate. Their following year, it will look like this. The Wildcats, Buckeyes, Nittany Lions, and Boilermakers will be coming in, while they will be on the road for those 5 teams, as well as taking Oklahoma on the road. Again, this is a Michigan team under Jim Harbaugh that's now won the Big Ten in back-to-back years. What do you see in those schedules for them?
I love it. I mean, you talk about the competition, you talk about the non-conference schedule, and always that Ohio State team is always going to be looming there for a big game for them to have an opportunity to play. But this just gives them another opportunity to continue to cement their place as a national power, because I absolutely believe they've gotten back to that point. But when you look at the schedule, non-conference, you're adding the West Coast teams, this now becomes a team that is going to be on the national map for a long time.
And I think what Michigan fans will notice right away is the big change for them is Penn State is not a lock. They will not be playing Penn State every single year. It'll be every other year at least. But they will still have Ohio State, and they will still have Michigan State, and that matters an awful lot. As for the Buckeyes, here's what their 2024 conference slate looks like. How about the road schedule here for them? At MSU, at the Gophers, at Penn State, and at UCLA. As for 2025, Ohio State will be hosting Indiana, Maryland, Nebraska, and USC at home, and then they've got a Texas team as well in a non-conference slate. Ohio State under Ryan Day, a playoff team last year, continues to recruit as good as just about anybody in the country. What do you see there?
Yeah, I think as you look at the same thing, you talk about being able to be challenged in the non-conference schedule. That's going to be there. Now you add UCLA, who's still going to have a lot of interest. And this, to me, one of the things that stands out when you start to look at this is for the fan base. And I think I go back to that. There's going to be a lot of fans traveling, wanting to get out to the West Coast. There are going to be a lot of West Coast fans with those two teams wanting to come to the Midwest and out east to come to some of these historic venues.
And I know something folks at home are thinking. They're going, wait a minute, if there's no divisions and it's just the 2 best teams, and you showed us Michigan, Ohio State, there's a chance those 2 teams could meet up in their classic regular game and then the next week meet up again in the Big Ten championship game. We're going to talk to the Ohio State athletic director, Gene Smith, about that coming up in just a little bit. He's one of the key decision makers in the conference. We'll get his insight as to what he thought about all these changes. We'll also break down every single Big Ten schedule. We'll talk about the rivalries like Wisconsin and Minnesota that are continuing on, as well as some of the rivalries that will no longer be guaranteed every single year, but will be every other year, like Penn State taking on Michigan State. A lot still to come here on the Big Ten Network. Let's look at some more schedules now. Here's the Badgers' Big Ten Conference slate in 2024. And what an interesting time for this program, right? Luke Fickell comes in now, high-profile head coach, taking over the program. And you'll notice they keep Iowa as a rivalry every year. They keep Minnesota as a rivalry every year. Then they're adding USC these first 2 years as a program that they will play first on the road and then at home. So Wisconsin is a program that can really bring in a big audience. They've got great atmosphere there. These are going to be some excellent games.
Yeah, I love the home schedule. Both 24 and 25. You think about what they're able to do, the home field advantage that they have is outstanding. And if this program gets right back on the right track where they need to be from a team standpoint, they're going to have some great matchups at home.
Well, PJ Fleck has got the program on the right track in
no
Minnesota,
doubt.
and you saw that they are going to continue to play the Badgers. Here's what the Gophers have going for them in 2024. Iowa, Northwestern, Ohio State, and Rutgers will be their home games that year. That's a loaded road schedule, huh? Indiana, Michigan, Nebraska, UCLA, and Wisconsin. In general, what's your takeaway on Minnesota? A program that, again,
gonna be tough.
They're quietly really good every year.
Yeah, they're really, PJ Fleck has done an unbelievable job, but you look at that schedule for 24, and it's going to be daunting. You talk about the home schedule and also the road schedule, but this is a program that's really decided that this is where they're going to be. We're going to compete at a national level, and they've done an outstanding job of doing that.
And they don't keep Nebraska on a schedule every single year, but in this beginning two-year iteration, they do have the Huskers in 2024 and once again here in 2025. And interestingly enough, you also see in their non-conference game, they got a Pac-12 team, California, on the road. Well, let's get more on all these scheduling decisions now as we bring in the commissioner of the Big Ten, Tony Petitti. And Tony, I mean, heck, this is something you used to do on the other side back in your ABC days, literally scheduling college football games for television. What would you say in your role now as a commissioner and what the crew had done before you got there were the main goals in these decisions unveiled today?
Mike, great to be with you, and thank you. A lot of familiarity with football scheduling. And obviously I came in this process where a lot of it had been worked out and done. And I will say that I think the team at the conference office and Kerry, Kenny, athletic directors, and all the feedback from staff was just really well done. I think the first thing is just, preserving some of the matchups that are important to Big Ten fans and to the member institutions, making sure those matchups continue, understanding that it goes beyond just one or two schools. I think the second really important thing is especially with the integration of USC and UCLA and bringing them in the conference, just being able to see more opponents more frequently is really important when you think about the integration and bringing everybody together. Just having that rotation, I think it really connects everybody when you're going to get and rotate through opponents very quickly. So I think the plan they had makes a lot of sense. The 9 games makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm really happy and pleased with where it ended up. And, I think this is a really important day and sort of sets the tone for, what's to come. And you look at the quality of the matchups, I think it's just remarkable what you're going to see on, Big Ten Saturdays going forward.
You touched on this, but I want you to elaborate. Basically, a way you can look at it is every Big Ten team is guaranteed to play every other Big Ten team at least once every 2 years. How important was that to you?
I think it's one of the most primary things that was accomplished with this format, right? When you move away from divisions, you make that decision that you want to have more competitive balance, right? So there's really 2 ways to think about it. You want competitive balance. You want to respect history and tradition in the conference, even as you're expanding, right? And you also want to connect fans. So I think all of those things were done with this format, and so I think we're just going down the absolute right direction. I think our media partners are happy with it. It's just the right thing to do, and I think our fans are going to really come to like and understand how powerful this format is. Divisions
officially eliminated. What were the main reasons for that?
I think it gets back to what you were asking before, which is just the ability to see more opponents. You can start thinking about competitive balance inside the conference and how to manage that. I think this format, eliminates some of those concerns and takes that off the table, really. So I think that's a big part of it.
This is for 2 years. Is the idea for that in 2 years you can adjust based on either competitive balance shifting, if, say, a program like Nebraska becomes a national power again the way it was for decades, or even if a school like Penn State says, hey, we actually miss playing Rutgers every year, we'd like to go back in. Is the idea that this allows flexibility down the line?
I think it does to some extent. I think schedules are living things, right, in some ways, right? And when you think about what they accomplish, I think there's always going to be feedback and understanding of where things are headed. But I think everybody's pretty confident this is a format that's really going to endure. I think it's built that way to sort of have, go beyond these 2 years. So I feel really good about that. But look, I don't think we'd be doing our jobs if we don't sort of understand, take stock. There's something that, I learned a lot through really in the media days about, you want to build tradition, you want to build repetition, but you also want to think, in new ways as often as you can to see that you're not missing anything, and there are other things that become more important over time. But I think this process, is leading to a system that's going to endure. But again, of course, you wouldn't be doing your job if you weren't just taking stock every so often.
I mentioned that Penn State has no protected rivalries, whereas a school like Iowa has 3. I'm curious how you balanced the input that you were getting from schools versus what you and everyone in the conference just thinks was best for everyone else.
Yeah, I think, again, having not been in those rooms, like sort of getting to the point where it was at the end of the process. But I think, obviously there's a line that you have to, get to when you consider those things. And the good thing about a conference like the Big Ten, obviously the history is so deep and long that it makes it easier to weigh those factors, right? There's just great familiarity with what's important to member institutions and what's important to fans. So that's a huge head start when you try to make the evaluations that you're talking about, right? It's not like they're doing it in a vacuum. It's just years and years of experience and understanding. And it may not be the same for all institutions. Some institutions over time have played, games that matter across rivalries that developed across, 1, 2, 3 schools, as you're pointing out. So I think it's just, you understand the history, you salute it, you acknowledge what's made it important, and then go from there. But I think it's just, there's such a great long body of work here that it makes that process a little bit easier, I would think. That doesn't mean there aren't tough choices. Of course there are, but I think in here they've done a really good job of understanding, the DNA of the conference.
What about non-conference scheduling? Today was all about Big Ten against Big Ten. What do you believe the philosophy should be going forward in the remaining games for a football team?
I think each of those institutions will make those decisions. One thing you can see with non-conference schedules, they're done, pretty far out in terms of how opponents are selected. I think, we're playing a really competitive, 9-game conference schedule. I think institutions will make decisions about, the right balance of opponents given the year. There's some rivalries that go across, some traditions of maybe playing some other schools, playing regionally, things like that. So I think all those factors get in. I think those are decisions that are made. I think we, in the conference office, you want to make sure that we're doing things, strength of schedule and how it impacts the CFP. All of that will be taken into account as we learn what the new CFP is like and, how decisions are made there in terms of, qualifying as many teams as possible.
Commissioner Tony.
But overall, that's all it all comes together. Strength of schedule and how non-conference is played affects everybody. So I think that's just ways that we want to address that as a collective.
Commissioner, I know you got a busy docket basically every day these days, so we appreciate you giving us some of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And the commissioner talking about how there are still some big matchups. Well, here's Penn State's 2024 schedule. Look at their home slate. MSU, Nebraska, Northwestern, Ohio State, and USC. Throw in Wisconsin as a road game, and there are high-profile games left and right when it comes to the Nittany Lions. And in 2025, you got UCLA at home, Michigan, MSU, USC, Iowa on the road. Penn State stands out, Howard, because as we said, there are 0 full-time protected rivalries that they have, and yet that also allows them the flexibility to have all these fascinating matchups.
A great matchup. What game, what week would be the whiteout? You have no idea. They've got a lot of options there, but it's going to be exciting to continue to watch this program grow because you look at that schedule, it's outstanding.
And that's a great point about the whiteout. I mean, you could argue it feels like, it's maybe 2 or 3 teams they pick from every year. Not so much anymore. It's going to be wide open with that flexible schedule that they have going forward. They will be playing for the land-grant trophy, at least in these 2 years. It will continue to play with Penn State. As you look at the Michigan State 2024 schedule, you got Penn State, Nebraska, Michigan, and Maryland as their road games. As for 2025, Tuck coming to a pretty good schedule there as well. Michigan, Northwestern, Penn State, and the Bruins will all be in East Lansing that season. What's your takeaway from MSU's upcoming future?
Well, you look at it, they've got some tough road games that they're going to have to prepare for. And this is all predicated on how these teams continue to grow next year, right, Mike? I know we're looking 2 years down the line, but it's about this Michigan State team getting back to where they were 2 years ago. And if they can do that, you talk about a schedule that's setting up for them to really have a chance to shoot for a Big Ten title.
And Mel Tucker's wanted that program to be in that national conversation. They will have opportunities, if they're good, for many of those games to be national spotlight games for sure. All right, a lot more to come. We mentioned we had Penn State with nobody in terms of a full-time rival. The exact opposite is Iowa. We'll talk about them. All 3 options for protected rivals are there, as well as Nebraska. And we'll go to the land of Lincoln, Illinois, and Northwestern. What do their futures look like in conference play? Here's a look at the Iowa Big Ten slate of games. In 2024, they will have home games with Maryland, Nebraska, UCLA coming to town, and the Wisconsin Badgers. As for 2025, they will have pretty impressive home slate there again. Michigan, MSU, Minnesota, Northwestern, and Penn State. Remember, they're still keeping their non-conference rivalry with Iowa State. And Iowa is the one that sticks out the most because with this Flex Protect Plus model, it allows them to keep those three big rivalry games that they wanted to keep every single year.
And that's huge for Iowa. You think about that, and also the rivalries that are in place, because it also shows the flexibility of the conference, the athletic directors to allow this to happen, because things that may be important to them, like Iowa, those three protected games, they're able to happen. And going with this model allows that to happen and allows the flexibility throughout the scheduling.
Minnesota and Wisconsin, great history for them as rivals with Iowa. And then Nebraska, a team that just joined the conference not that long ago, but has already made a big impact on that rivalry, especially now they've often been playing it on the Friday of Thanksgiving. You look at the Cornhuskers 2024 conference slate. Their 4 home games will be Indiana, MSU, Minnesota, and Wisconsin in that year. And it's a new tenure this upcoming year for Matt Rule as a head coach. What do you see when you look at the Nebraska schedule?
Well, I think we're going to find out a lot about this team this year, really. So that'll really give us some insight to how this team is ultimately going to be able to compete. I think this is a talented team. They've done a lot of things as far as the transfer portal is concerned. So they have an opportunity now with the new coaching staff in place to be able to take advantage of some of those opportunities. But its schedule looks great when you look at 24 and 25.
And they are a team that only has Iowa as a protected rival. So this upcoming 2024 and 2025 season, you will see a UCLA happening on their schedule, both in 2024 as well as in 2025. Now, one of the more influential voices in Big Ten athletics is joining us now, the AD at Ohio State, Gene Smith. Gene, when it comes to this scheduling, how important to you was the Big Ten championship game being 1 versus 2 in the conference as opposed to the winners of 2 divisions?
Well, it was important. And, those 2 teams demonstrated through their body of work that they've earned that opportunity to compete in the championship game. And so when you run the gauntlet of the regular conference season and you end up being number 1 and number 2 in the standings, you've earned that right. So I'm excited about having no divisions. I think divisions served us well in our history, in our transition to this space. But now this opportunity to play a kind of semi-round robin is actually a lot better.
When the news of the LA schools joining the Big Ten, the first thing everyone thought of was travel. It seems clear that you'll be limiting West Coast trips, 1 per school, basically, every season. How important was that?
Yeah, it was important. We wanted to make sure that we didn't put too much of a burden on individual institutions. And so it's basically spread out among all of the schools once we go to 16, where you will have that opportunity to go to the West Coast and obviously the West Coast to come east. So it's, I think the balance worked out well, but it was important to make sure that it was spread out. So no individual team or teams had to deal with the consistent and constant travel.
I want to ask you about some specific things for Ohio State. Ever since divisions happened, Ohio State was playing Penn State every year. And oftentimes these were top 10 games, and oftentimes these were very close games. You'll still be playing them at least every other year, but it will not be every single year anymore going forward. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. Penn State had developed into a competitive rivalry for us. Unlike the other 11 protected games in this model, where you have some history and tradition around those competitions. You look at the 3 that Iowa protected, or the Illinois protected, or the fact that we protected Michigan. Those are historical rivalries, deep-rooted rivalries. And but the Penn State rivalry for us was a competitive rivalry. And so in order to meet the balance of trying to make sure that every team, every school had an opportunity over a 4-year period to play at every place at least twice, you had to sacrifice some things. And So the flex protect model allows us to meet that criteria, but at the same time, we needed to make sure that we provided flexibility to meet that criteria.
Final 30 seconds for you here. This does mean the potential exists, I believe, unless I'm missing something, for Michigan, Ohio State to play back-to-back weeks, correct?
Yeah, that's an old conversation, Mike, as you well know. Goes back to, what is it, Legends and Leaders.
Uh-huh.
That conversation existed. So that is a possibility. And so we talked about that, and Ward and I talked about that, the athletic director of Michigan, and we agreed to that for the betterment of the whole, the betterment of the league, relative to our overall scheduling format, and our television partners. At the end of the day, we needed to accept that as a possibility.
Gene Smith, AD at Ohio State. Always great insight from you. Wish we had more time, but thank you for all your answers. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mike. Take care and go Bucks.
Well, let's make an Auerbach transition here from Gene Smith and Ohio State to the Fighting Illini. You look at their upcoming 2024 conference slate. They will have Ohio State on the road. That's not a protected rival. Illinois' protected rivalries will be Northwestern and Purdue. But in this particular two-year cycle, they do have Ohio State, not only in 2024, but then again at home back in 2025. And we all know that the momentum is there in Champaign with Brett Bielema, an 8-win team last year. These could be some really exciting games in Champaign.
Really exciting games in Champaign. And then you think about going on the road where you go out to California. Illinois has a huge contingency out there of the alumni. So that can be huge for them, too, as far as opening up that market. And I think that's one of the other things that is going to be a byproduct of bringing in the West Coast teams, as teams are going to start to go out there and understand they've got a chance to play in front of some of their fans out there and also be able to recruit that area.
And the cool thing with adding these LA schools is you'll get Rose Bowl memories. When UCLA plays in Illinois, you're starting to think back to some, Tony Eason days, I think, back in the early 80s when they were meeting up. Now, another really interesting team in this whole shuffle is Northwestern. Here's what their schedule looks like in 2024. The Wildcats only have Illinois as a team that was protected, although they do also have Ohio State as a team in this particular two-year span that they will be playing back-to-back years. They will be in Columbus in 2024, and they will have the Buckeyes at home in 2025, along with Maryland, Purdue, Rutgers, and Wisconsin. But the reason I think Northwestern is so interesting, Howard, is because this is a big shift. Northwestern won the division and played in the Big Ten championship game twice in the last 5 years. This is a very different scenario for them as a whole.
It really is, but they have an opportunity. When you look at some of the home games that they have, some things could really line up well for them. They just have to get back on track as far as playing the game on the field, getting those things straightened out, and I think Pat Fitzgerald will be able to do it, but there are some great matchups there that fans are going to love.
I mentioned Northwestern will continue to have that Illinois game every single year. That one goes back a long ways. So does the old Oaken Bucket game between Purdue and Indiana. And yes, that is protected. We're going to give Howard's thoughts on the Boilermakers and the Hoosiers schedule, as well as the most recent new teams to join the Big Ten. What does Howard think of Maryland and Rutgers in this divisionless Big Ten? That's coming up in just a bit. Head out east now, check in on the Maryland Terrapins, upcoming conference opponents in 2024. Remember, this is a Terp squad, won their bowl game, won 8 wins overall. Look at that home slate. MSU, Purdue, Rutgers, USC, and Wisconsin in 2024. The following year, they got Indiana, Michigan, Nebraska, and Penn State at home, and on the road, they got Minnesota, Ohio State, UCLA, and of course, they continue their matchup with Rutgers every single year. This is a Maryland team that, in a way, gets a sigh of relief. I mean, this is still a tough schedule, but it's not locked in that they'll have Michigan State, Penn State every single season.
And that's significant, right? We talked about going away from division. There's going to be some teams that have the opportunity to benefit. Maryland is one of those teams. And you look at that road schedule in 24, it's manageable, right? You look at 25, it's manageable. So they're in a much better position than they have been in previous years.
And the same thing goes for their fellow institution that joined them at the same time, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. This will be not as daunting in theory because they're no longer in that Big Ten East. You look at their 2024 schedule, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, and the Bruins will be heading to Piscataway in 2024. And a similar thing for Greg Schiano, right? It's a tough uphill climb for him, but if the schedule eases at least a little bit, that gives them an opening in the door.
It will. You look at the 24 schedule, I really like that. You look at 25, having to go out to UCLA. Penn State's always a tough one. Nebraska's going to be there as well. So there are some things that they're going to have to deal with, but to me, a lot of it's just internal. They have to continue to build as a program, and with Coach Schiano at the helm, I think they'll be able to do it.
Well, you mentioned the 25 schedule for the Scarlet Knights. Here's what that looks like, and yeah, those road games are indeed tough. And listen, even though they don't have as daunting as it was, it's still in the Big Ten going to be an awful lot of challenging games, whether you're at home or whether you're on the road. Well, let's stay on the East Coast now and bring on our next guest, the newly named COO of the Big Ten, Kerry Kenny. First off, congrats on that, Kerry. But let's get right into this. This has been something you, I know specifically, have been working on for a long time. What was the most challenging part of all of this?
Well, it's great to be with you today, Mike, and thanks for the note of congratulations. It's an exciting time for the Big Ten, and certainly today's announcement goes along with that. First time we've been able to really recognize us as a 16-team conference in terms of how we're going to piece this all together from a football scheduling perspective. And I think that's one of the elements that was tough about this. It's been a process that's been over a year in the making, and partway through that year, we added 2 new schools, 2 historically great programs. And so as many times as we thought we were looking at a pathway where we found some ground to cover on this scheduling process, external factors would pop up, and we'd have to reevaluate and maybe make some different decisions than we had originally thought. But I think all along, our athletic directors, our coaches, our conference staff, and everybody that really played a part in this, everybody was committed to making sure that we did what was in the best interest of the Big Ten, hopefully in the best interest of college football at large in this new era of college football expansion, and just balancing a lot of tradition in the Big Ten with trying to be a little bit innovative and figure out how in a no divisional format do you still acknowledge a lot of the rivalries that our fans and our student athletes and our TV partners and everybody involved in the Big Ten that they love to see played, but also figure out a way to create some new and exciting matchups, especially with our 2 newest members. And so trying to figure out a lot of competing factors and make it, thread the needle in a way that we announced and landed on today. I think we're all very confident and committed to seeing this and really pulling it off in a way that is going to be exciting for Big Ten fans starting in fall of 2024.
I want to ask you about divisions, and I'm going to do a journalism no-no here, which you're used to with me, but I'm going to ask you a long question. There's a reason for it. The argument for no divisions is obviously geography won't have any implication on who wins, and it's going to be the best versus second best team in the conference playing for the Big Ten title game. The flip side argument would be if you have divisions, there are more teams that are playing quote-unquote meaningful games in November. For example, this past year, week 12, 5 Big Ten West teams were still alive to win the conference because they were still alive to win their division with only 2 games left to go. That now goes away. How much of a concern was that in getting rid of divisions?
It was absolutely a part of the conversation, Mike, and our athletic directors and coaches raised that. At the end of the day, what prevailed was the fact that by moving to a no division format, you get to create a more fluid rotation of opponents. How many times you play everybody else in the conference. Divisions have been great for the Big Ten in terms of competitiveness in the regular season. We know that the championship game is leaned towards the East. But if you look at divisions, the benefit there is that, to your point, you get more interesting games in November. But by going to a no division format, now everybody gets to play every other team in the Big Ten twice in a 4-year period at least. And so if you are a football student athlete coming to one of our institutions and you stay for 4 years, you're going to play in every other Big Ten stadium. And that's a really meaningful experience. And a lot of our athletic directors who are former Big Ten student athletes or football student athletes really advocated for that. The other piece is in an expanded CFP landscape. We had to look around the horizon a little bit. Meaningful games in November is going to have a much different context starting in 2024, where a game that may not have had an impact on the conference title race in previous years, even with a division construct, you're now going to be potentially playing for one of those at-large bids in the CFP, and that's going to create some really meaningful, interesting games in those late stretches of the season, not just in the Big Ten, but across the country. And we're really confident that with our 9-game model and this model that we've debuted today, Flex Protect Plus, that's only going to really drive that much more home with the committee and with our fans and media partners in a meaningful way.
That's a great point about the playoff. You could have 4 or 5 or 6 teams fighting for that, in theory, by mid to late November any given year. You've brought up a couple times the new LA schools. I'm curious your thoughts on them. What were conversations with them like when it came to this? What were the priorities that they had?
Yeah, we obviously wanted to acknowledge and learn about their history and their preferences. Obviously, walking into the Big Ten and competing against our current 14 members is an exciting opportunity. Every time one of our teams goes out to play in the historic Rose Bowl in the iconic LA Coliseum, it's going to feel like a special big event that first time and hopefully every other time after that. LA is our largest alumni base outside of our Big Ten footprint of our current member institutions. And so there's just a lot of potential and opportunity out there in the LA market for these games to be important. But obviously we wanted to talk to them a lot about travel and, timing of the year. Obviously weather is a little bit different out there earlier in the season than it is late in the season. And so understanding, just the ebbs and flows of their ticket packages and just how things have gone for them in their current situation in the Pac-12 with building schedules and how they travel and other things like that. And so what we really tried to do was balance geography in 2 ways. Obviously, for our current 14 institutions, wanted to have everybody play in the LA market, either at USC or UCLA, as quickly as possible, and do that in a way that we were able to get their fan bases used to going out there and playing those games. On the reverse side of things, we wanted to make sure that we balanced to the extent that we could the travel to the Eastern time zone and the Central time zone for USC and UCLA, where all 5 of their opponents in a given year on the road weren't going to be their 5 longest trips of that season or potentially any season. So balancing how many times they played Eastern and Central, and then obviously they play one another back and forth through this process. Those were a lot of the conversations that went into it, but we couldn't be more excited to welcome both of those programs into the fold with this 2024 season.
Kerry, the work you've done the last few months is literally stuff that had never been done before. So congrats on getting it all done. Thanks for giving us some of your insight, man.
Appreciate it, Mike.
All right, back to the schools now. We check in on Indiana. And yeah, here's what they got at home in 2024. Maryland, Minnesota, Penn State, Purdue, and UCLA. Tough road schedule, too. Michigan State, Nebraska in there. You look at the 2025 season, these games are tough on the road, man. Illinois, Maryland, OSU, Purdue, and USC. Tom Allen has his work cut out in Bloomington. You look at that schedule, you see a whole bunch of matchups that they'll have an opportunity to make some noise if they can play well enough.
Yeah, if they can play well enough. It's about getting back to and capturing some of the magic that they had a couple of years ago when they went on that run. But it's about them going out and playing better football on the field, and that's what they have to really focus on. The schedule is what it is, but they've got to play better so they can take advantage of it.
They will still have that great rivalry game with the Old Oaken Bucket with Purdue. It will continue to be at the end of the season. And you look at the Boilermakers' upcoming schedule. They will have Indiana in 2024. They'll end their season in Bloomington on the road. That's a year, by the way, that's tough. They got Notre Dame and Oregon State on the road that year for the Boilermakers. As for 2025, here's your home slate: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Ohio State. Just a classic, traditional Purdue home schedule there in 2025, with Rutgers and UCLA kind of a newer wing of the Big Ten, if you will, for some road games.
Listen, Purdue has done an outstanding job as far as home field has been concerned over the last couple of years. They've been selling out the place. The energy in that stadium has been outstanding. Now you have an opportunity in a couple of years to bring a USC into town. They've got an opportunity to continue to build the momentum that they have in West Lafayette.
That's a great point, pointing out. We've seen how exciting that program can be with Jeff Brom. Now it's Ryan Walters who's in charge of it. If he can get it back to that level, level, there will be some games that live up to the hype and show what Ross-Ade can really be like when they got a full house and they are rocking. So we're not quite done with all of this. We're going to check in with Nicole Auerbach, get some national perspective on how this news today makes the Big Ten look nationally as a whole. So again, what they're calling this plan is Flex Protect Plus as a schedule model. Iowa's the only school that has 3 protected matchups every single year. Penn State, the only school that doesn't have any protected matchups. Michigan will still play Ohio State and will still play the Spartans. And as for the new LA schools, they have each other as the protected matchup, and that is it. Let's get some more perspective on this now. Glad to bring in Big Ten Network's own Nicole Auerbach. Nicole, what were your initial thoughts when you heard all this information?
I love it. I think that this was the model I liked the most from the start. I think the idea of having a different amount of protected games for each school, depending on how many games are that important to them that they wanted to protect and play on an annual basis, is a smart reason to make this choice. I also think this was the model that gave you the most flexibility with the LA schools by only having them be each other's rival. That is going to help massively down the road as they need to schedule and sequence all of the games for everybody else to make those West Coast trips.
How does this play nationally when you consider the SEC just said they're going to stay at 8 games, which means some teams won't play against each other for a long time. And now you've got the Big Ten saying even as we expand to 16, every other year you're going to play every school in the conference.
This is what all of these leagues need to be doing, and especially the SEC going to 16 teams should be playing a 9-game schedule. You should be setting up your schools so that they play everybody else. That's the whole point of having a conference and being associated with these other schools, is to actually get to see them and to have athletes who come to your school, play there for 4 years, get an opportunity to play everybody in the conference and get to all of these different amazing venues in your league. I think that's what you really need to be prioritizing. And I just think it makes the most sense. You're going to be setting up your teams for success by playing them in much more competitive and balanced schedules and putting your 2 best teams in the conference championship game. This is what we have an opportunity right now to do, is to reset schedules, think about these things as we move towards new conferences with 16 members, a 12-team college football playoff. And I think that the model that the Big Ten selected really prioritizes all of those things, including the athlete experience, but also positioning yourself for that CFP berth.
Yeah, it does. If you're a high school senior coming to the Big Ten in 2024, you're going to be at and have home every single Big Ten team if you stay 4 years. Final 30 seconds here. Does anyone stand out to you as, you know what, they're kind of a really big winner in all of this?
I think the winners that stand out to me are Iowa, because they get to keep all 3 of the rivalries that they felt were important. This was really one of the few ways where they were going to be able to do that in a world where not everybody had 3 rivals and you needed to worry about that West Coast travel. Also big winners, Rutgers and Maryland. It has just been a brutal life living in the East Division, and now they're going to be entering a world where all of the schedules are much more balanced for everyone.
Nicole Auerbach, always great to talk with you on this. Thanks so much for your perspective. We are not quite done with our show. We got some thoughts from Nicole. We're going to get some final thoughts coming up from Howard Griffith on this big and busy day in the world of Big Ten football. So again, the big notes from today, the 2024-2025 conference schedule is out for Big Ten. It will still be 9 games. There will no longer be divisions. Each team will play the same 3 opponents each of these 2 years. Some of them fall under the protected rivals that will continue every single year. Currently, teams in the Big Ten East, along with UCLA, will play 5 home games in 2024. That will flip to be 5 home games for the other teams in 2025. Mike Holland, Howard Griffith back here with you. And there's a lot to digest over all of this. But I think one of the interesting things is that the Big Ten championship game will no longer be the winner of 2 divisions. It'll be the best and second best team. Now, you might be thinking, well, what about tiebreakers, right? Let's say hypothetically, Ohio State goes undefeated. Michigan and Penn State have 1 loss. Both their losses to Ohio State. We don't know all that
Not yet.
We're going to find that out later on. They will unveil what the tie-breaking procedure is. But You think this is a big step forward for the league, having the two best teams meeting up?
I do. I think it's an opportunity for them to have, as you mentioned, the two best teams playing in the Big Ten championship game. We start to look toward the playoffs and how many teams that the Big Ten can get into a playoffs in that scenario, because now this Big Ten conference is obviously loaded, and the SEC is as well. But I think the Big Ten now is really positioned well to really make a big push into the playoffs this coming year, and if that model changes,
right,
they have a significant opportunity to get some other teams in.
And I did bring up earlier the idea of Michigan and Ohio State meeting up in back-to-back games, but as you and I talked about in one of the commercial breaks, like, that was a possibility in Leaders and Legends.
Yeah, it's always been there.
Right.
It's always been there, and they were able to figure it out and work it out. And I think that, the athletic directors and the Big Ten figured it's going to be okay. And it's just one of those things that's very important to both of those institutions, and it's big for college athletics as well.
What do you make of the protected rivalries? There are 11 matchups that have Big Ten history or geographical history, oftentimes both, that are going to stay as a matchup you can guarantee will happen every single year.
Yeah, I think that's really about those institutions, right? We've talked a lot about Iowa having 3 of those. If they really have some deep ties into those 3 rivalries. And then we also talked about on the other end is Penn State, who really doesn't have those natural rivalries, and they didn't force them to have rivalries. So I think it really works out for everyone the way things are set up now.
I think that's an interesting point you brought up. There's no forcing of anything. If you had divisions, you would be forcing USC and UCLA to make Minnesota a rival, or Nebraska, or whomever. And now, whatever those rivalries will become with these new LA schools, they'll happen on their own because you'll be playing at least every other year against everyone.
And they become competitive rivalries, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be so deep-rooted in what those institutions, when you look at a Minnesota and you look at a Wisconsin, those are deep ties. So now they don't have to deal with that.
So again, all this information is what's happening in 2024 and in 2025.
How about 2023, Mike?
2023, I'm glad you brought it up. We are 84 days away from Big Ten football. On Thursday, August 31st, Nebraska will be in Minneapolis to take on the Gophers, and that will kick off the Big Ten football season. For Howard Griffith, I'm Mike Hall. We'll see you next time.